everybody, this is Michelle and I have a video for you today in this stencil series. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create an ombre gradient inking look. This is similar to the last video I showed you where I showed you how to make a gradient with just one color, and for this one we're going to do a very similar technique but blending several colors together. So to start off, I brought out my diagonal stripe stencil, and I'm going to be taping a piece of cardstock down. I'm going to tape the edges with painter's tape, which is a removable tape that's really inexpensive, so I like to use this when I'm working with my stencils. And I just had previously sprayed the back of my stencil with Easy Tack, which is a removable spray adhesive, and that just makes sure that it keeps it in place while I'm inking. With a stencil like this where there's a lot of thin lines, it tends to move around a lot when you're blending ink on top, so I really recommend trying out the spray adhesive if you've had problems like that in the past. And this just really helps you get a crisp image without your stencil moving around. I also took out a whole bunch of colors of distress ink in blues and greens, and I just took them all out just so I could decide which ones I'm going to use. I'm not going to use all the ones here, but I'll give you the names of the colors as I go along. So first I'm going to start off with a blue color, and I'm just using my ink blending tool here. I started with Salty Ocean, and then I moved on to Broken China, which was a lighter blue color. And then I moved on to Evergreen Bough, which is kind of like a green teal color. And next I went to Mowed Lawn. You'll see I actually forgot to change my ink blending pad here, and I just use the same ones for blues and greens, and then I remember to change it after, but it doesn't matter too much because this actually helps the colors blend together better. And the next color I went to was Peeled Paint, and since that was the darkest green color I had, I just went backwards through all the colors, going to Mowed Lawn, Evergreen Bough, and then back to Broken China and Salty Ocean. So I have kind of a blue to green, back to blue ombre gradient here. And then when I was finished with all the colors, I just went back over with a light coating of Salty Ocean just because I wanted to make it more blue overall. And then I'm slowly peeling off the stencil and the tape, and you'll see this is the effect we have right here. And everything blended together really well, and I'm just going to wipe down my stencil and workspace with all of the extra ink with a baby wipe. So it's just super easy to clean, and then I can put that away for future use again. Just really quickly, I wanted to show you how I store my stencils. So I have this binder with 8.5 by 11 sheet protectors, and I just stick my stencils on top of a piece of scrap cardstock. This is cardstock that isn't very thick, and you could just use normal paper if you want. And I just have them all in a binder, so it's really easy to go through them and choose the one that I want. So the next thing I'm going to do is trim down this piece here. I didn't want a whole 4 1/4 by 5.5 sheet. I just wanted to cover part of my card with this. So I'm just cutting it down, making sure to get most of the colors that I want, and I'm going to make it cover about 2/3 of the front of a card. And for the rest of the blank space, I pulled out some scraps of pattern paper that I thought I would like. I kind of just went through this paper pad by Crate Paper because I saw that it had some shades of blues and greens, which were the same as what I used. But in the end, I thought it was better to actually go with a contrast of color. So instead of choosing a paper in blues and greens, I actually chose one that was in a more neutral cream color just to let the inking stand out more. And in between the cream colored pattern paper and the inked piece that I made, I just added a really thin strip of teal colored cardstock just to bring the both of them together and make it look more cohesive. And I just taped that down next to that, and I just have it hanging off the edge, and I'll turn it around and trim it off just so I can have it the perfect measurement without having to measure. And once that's done, I have my background all finished, and I just have to come up with the image and sentiment that I want. So I pulled out this stamp set by Lawn Fawn called Into the Woods, and I decided I would pick one of the creatures and then one of the word bubbles. And I picked this fox. I just think it's really adorable, and I end up using it a lot actually. So I'm stamping it on some watercolor paper in Stays on Ink because I want to watercolor this fox in. And I'm using distress markers to watercolor it in. And these are kind of like a watercolor marker. So I put down some red ink, this is in the Festive Berries color, onto an acrylic block. I didn't want to put it directly to paper because I want it to have a more subtle red look, which you'll see a little later on. And then directly onto my image, I colored in some brown with gathered twigs. And I just colored in some of the areas that I thought would be the darkest, so kind of the bottom of all the edges. And once that's colored in, I brought in my water brush, and instead of just adding direct water to the brown color, I actually picked up some of the red ink and I'm adding it to the brown color, so I kind of get a red-brown color, which I think is more of the color that most foxes are. And I'm just picking up more red ink where I need it, and if it got a little too red, I'm just going back and adding some brown ink in the same way, just putting it on top of my acrylic block first. So that's super easy to color, and now I'm just going to cut this out with my fine-tipped scissors. And I also ran along the edges of the fox with my black marker just so that you wouldn't see any white edges around there and it would look more finished. So once the fox is done, we're going to move on to the sentiment, and I chose the Smile word bubble, and I'm going to be heat embossing this in black. If you don't want to heat emboss, you can just use whatever black ink you want, but I'm going to stamp this in Versamark ink so that I can put some black embossing powder on top. And once I have all that powder on, I'm just going to go off camera for a little bit so I can heat this up. You'll see it got a little messy when I melted the embossing powder, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to be cutting this out. So I find that black embossing powder is kind of tricky to work with sometimes because if you get it anywhere besides your image, it looks really messy, kind of like what you see it did around the edges. So I only use it when I'm doing stuff like this where I'm going to be cutting out a solid image afterwards. And you'll see it's super shiny here from the melted heat embossing, and now that I have my sentiment and images all set, I'm going to cut a few foam squares, and I'm cutting them into triangles just so I can get into the little areas of the fox and word bubbles better. And once that's set, I just place them down. And for one more finishing touch, I took out my little container of sequins and little bits and things that I always turn to for finishing touches for cards. And this time, since I feel like this is more of a masculine card, I went for some wood veneers, which are neutral and not as girly as something like sequins or something like that. So I'm just using my Mono Multi glue and gluing just a couple of the wood veneers on around the sentiment just to bring the eye to it more. And once that's glued on, the card is all finished. And here are some close-up shots of the card. You'll see that the distress inks blended really well into each other, and you get a really cool ombre effect with this, where the colors just seamlessly blend into each other. And I think this just gives a really great background for little critters like this fox or any other images you want to use. If you're interested in the stencil I use, I actually have a set of 4 basic stencils over on my website, which you can head over to. And if you haven't watched my video on how to create DIY stencils, you can click the icon here and it'll bring you right over so that you can make your own stencils and create effects like this. Thank you for watching. You can head over to my blog at michelleYdesign.com for more information, and I hope to see you again soon.